Now to a story that demonstrates how poorly some of our veterans are being treated in this country. There's a range of services available through the RSL and Young Diggers who will free of charge assist veterans to apply for a payout where they have sustained a permanent impairment as a result of their service of our country. But recently, predatory fee-for-service agencies have started to proliferate, and they're exploiting veterans' hardship for their own benefit, charging them for services that are already available to them without fee. These consultants are pushing for veterans to sign on to their services at enormous cost, charging large upfront fees and even cancellation fees if they realise they've been sold a pup. I've also been told that they're pushing veterans to claim a large single lump sum payment, even if it might not be in their best interests, instead of long-term weekly amounts, so that the consultant can get a quick buck in their hand and an easy clip on the taxpayer-funded payout. And the impact on these veterans, many of whom are already vulnerable and suffering from the effects of conditions like PTSD, has of course been profound. Joining me to discuss this really concerning development and how it's affecting the people who serve this country is Ryan Shaw. Ryan spent more than a decade in the military, was deployed across East Timor, Afghanistan and Northern Australia, and now he fights for veterans post their service. Ryan, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me. Now, first, thank you for all you've done for this country through service, but also through helping to fight for veterans. I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge. But explain what these fee-for-service firms are doing to take advantage of vulnerable vets.
Well, it is having a tremendous impact. It's quite bad. I've seen some veterans who've been stooped for about $17,000 of their payouts. At the more extreme level, they are sending debt collectors after our veterans if they do come across what's happening to them. And I think one of the more concerning things is that they're taking money out of pensions. So pension funds are going straight into the accounts of these predatory fee-for-service accounts, and it's very sad. So
what is drawing them to approach veterans and sign them up to these arrangements?
It is, I suppose, at some level going after their vulnerabilities. In some cases, it's been heard that they're going to mental health wards, they're going to medical places, and they are preying on their vulnerabilities, going after them and their money and then stooping them of their payouts.
Sounds like American-style ambulance chasing, really. And so just to understand what's going on here, when a veteran has a condition that's permanent following their service, they'd ordinarily be entitled to apply for a certain payout from the Australian taxpayer to help cover the cost of that for the rest of their life. Is that right?
Yeah. These are permanent impairments, which means they have to carry that injury for the rest of their life. And it's worth noting that if the Department of Veteran Affairs sees it as permanent and offers a payout, that payout belongs solely to the veteran and not to some overseas lawyer or to some predatory consultancy service that isn't doing this out of the kindness of their own heart like some organisations do. They volunteer to help veterans through this process.
And those monies are supposed to not just help pay for either services or equipment that might be needed to manage that condition for life, but it's also supposed to help them with retraining and finding a pathway forward that's going to give them a satisfying life post-service. Is it meant to cover other things as well, or is that the way in which those funds are meant to be directed?
I think it's an acknowledgement of their service and that the injury they sustained, but this is life-changing money. And the person I spoke to the other day being stooped for almost $20,000. Imagine that difference that would make to the veteran and their family, and if their children are attending school. And as I said, this money belongs to them and not to these predatory services.
And there's got to be a psychological impact too upon a veteran who, has already had some challenges they've got to overcome if they're facing a permanent impairment, to then have that feeling of being tricked and even shame associated with having been taken for a ride. How do you see that playing out among the people you talk to?
It is very disheartening and it's having a tremendous effect on them. Imagine being stooped of a payout. Imagine having a pension offered to you because of your injuries, but having to give a small portion to that to an overseas legal company or to a fee-for-service provider. And this is money that's supposed to sustain them and their wellbeing, and once it's taken away, their wellbeing and that declines.
So if there's veterans watching who are in this situation or thinking about making a claim in relation to their impairment, what's your message to them? If you could give them a warning or a message to try and help prevent this kind of harm, what would you say to them?
There's revered organisations out there that have been doing this for a long time. The RSL's been providing free services for quite some time, and as you said, young diggers. I'd encourage them to look to the volunteer services that exist out there to help servicemen and their families. And I'd ask the current command in Defence to keep an eye on their soldiers. If their troops are discharging, I'd encourage them to go and look through their paperwork, give them a bit of oversight and encourage them to stay away from the known names in this space.
Okay, and is there something that, beyond the command, the regulatory regime requires in order to be fit for purpose here?
That's a good question. And if you look at general workplace injuries, if an Australian is injured at work, they're rightfully entitled to access to legal services. And these legal services are heavily regulated and operated on fixed fees. And they're not allowed to touch a percentage of somebody's payout. And I'd ask why, I'd ask the government why veterans aren't afforded this. And I would encourage decision makers in Canberra to look into implementing some oversight, some transparency, and maybe regulating this industry so that predatory people can't leech off our veterans.
Ryan Shaw, thank you very much for the work that you do to try and make sure people don't get taken for a ride.
Thank you very much.